We at the University of California, Berkeley. I need to get this gear quick, but tell me I don't look like a student.
Hey, go Barry, bro.
Today, bruh, we got two signs. We're doing a little bit differently. God and science are not mutually exclusive, and we got science needs God to make sense.
I feel like you look at science macroscopically, and you just keep zooming out,
I feel like,
Yeah.
God made science for us to.
Right. God made science, right? For us to explore.
The concept of like the universe being made from nothing is like, you got a lot of faith to believe that.
I think that there's some things that can't be explained with science.
All I can say is that there's no evidence to prove God is real, but there's no evidence to prove he's not real.
Help me. Bro, you're standing there, bro. You gotta get, bro. Come on, man. Get it, bro. I want to hear what you gotta say on it. I want to hear what you gotta say on it.
I also want to hear what you gotta say.
Okay. Yeah.
You're saying science needs God to make sense. Do you see God as like a root cause or involved in the, in the middle in the scientific process?
Okay, so like when it comes to the okay, stop. Perfect, bro. Oh wow, this is why I love Berkeley, bro. Because y'all know the terms, bro. Y'all know the terminology, the scientific method. So like the way I think about it, right? Science stands on a couple things, right? When I hear science, I'm like, okay, observation, hypothesis. You know what I'm saying? Developing hypothesis, and then testing them, right? That's like science in a nutshell, right?
That's science.
That's basically science. Without that, there's no science. But the only thing about that is like that science assumes certain things that don't come from science, that are philosophical. Like science doesn't prove the laws of logic. Science doesn't prove like causation. Science doesn't prove like uniformity, right?
Uniformity.
Would you agree? Do you think that science proves uniformity?
Sorry, what's the uniformity?
So like the law of uniformity is that basically the future will be like the past. If we have similar conditions. So for example, like my good sis here, right? When you went to sleep, did you slept in your bed? Did you strap yourself to your bed? Like you didn't strap yourself to bed thinking that gravity was going to undo itself. Like while you midway through the night, you was going to slam into the ceiling, right?
Yeah.
Given the same situation, like circumstantial situation, there'll be similar effects. So it's like, okay, like uniformity, we have that law of uniformity that science assumes. And I'm saying that science assumes it because if things weren't uniform, then experimental results would actually mean nothing. You know what I'm saying? Like if water boiled at 200 degrees today and 300 degrees tomorrow, then we couldn't come to any conclusive results about anything. You know what I'm saying? So like, but why I'm saying that science needs God in this sense is because a worldview, like an atheistic or an evolutionary worldview where there's no God, right? Where everything is just random and subject to chance, that is not the type of worldview that would allow us to affirm something like uniformity. If everything's random, that's the opposite of uniformity. I would argue that a worldview where there's a God, that's, bro, get into this, man. Let's talk about it some more. I'm not gonna throw in that joint. He don't want to talk about it, but it's okay. But what I was saying was that I think that a worldview in which there's a God who's a creator, who's a sustainer, who's an upholder, that right there is the type of worldview that allows us to affirm something like uniformity. More than an atheistic worldview, I believe.
I think that you're absolutely right.
Oh, really?
I think science...
Bro, I'm not gonna lie, bro. I thought he was gonna say I was absolutely wrong, bro. I thought you were going, which is okay, because I'm willing to talk and learn about it, but go ahead, bro.
I think science assumes things that it doesn't prove. Things
like uniformity or causation, etc.
Yeah, and, you know, a worldview under God can... You do have better reasoning for why those things should be true.
Yeah.
You have things to rely on.
Yeah.
I don't think that means that God is the only way to,
to make sense of certain things.
To make sense of those things. And I also think that a worldview with God also has things other than those that need some sort of root explanation. Like I think you might be pushing off things like uniformity onto God.
Let me clarify. I think that like a worldview where there's a God allows us to actually affirm that, okay, like that would make sense for things to be uniform if there was some creator who was sustaining things. But I think
your thing, bro, you going crazy.
Appreciate it, bro. Appreciate you. But like yeah, I wouldn't. I'm not trying to assume God. So when I say God needs science, and when I say that second sign that I don't think that God and science are mutually exclusive, I think that if you follow science for what it says, like if you follow the evidence strictly for what it leads, I think that it leads you to conclusion where there is a God. For example, right? Let's say a simple message, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like your kicks. Like I like your case. So let's just say like for example like let's say you came on like to the beach and you saw like you know how people always be doing those little heart things like the lovey-dovey joint like A plus blank.
Yeah.
Would you assume that came from a person?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I can't think of anything else that would cause it.
What type of natural? Have you ever seen a natural force like go ahead and create like a little like heart in the sand? We've never seen that. Anytime there's a message, anytime there's a design that communicates a message, there's a designer, right? It comes from a source. Like you would say that the person that came and wrote into the sand is like the designer of that thing. Like what types of so like any like design that communicates a message, I've only seen those things to come from intelligence. Like for example, or like Mount Rushmore.
That's true. But
go
what
ahead.
about like snowflakes? Snowflakes have really intricate, beautiful, complex structure. But we can explain how that structure arises from one point and just very simple physical laws.
Okay, but does the structure of a snowflake communicate a message?
So what
go ahead.
message are you talking about when you're insinuating that?
Sorry?
Like what message are you talking about when you're insinuating that God?
Like I guess like any form of like message. So like, cause like when it comes to like evidence of aliens, like if we heard like signals like or like Morse code, something like Morse code, that's a message, right? It doesn't say like when I say message, it doesn't just have to be audible. Like even that A plus admin, it communicates a message. It says something without saying anything audible.
You're saying his snowflakes don't communicate a message. So what message does God communicate?
I think that complex design communicates the message or communicates the existence of a designer. That's what I'm saying. So like if there's a message of some sorts, like the natural structure of like even let's say like take the human body, right? Like DNA, right? That's a complex message. You know what I'm saying? I would say that right there bears testament to a designer.
Wait, so how is the body a message but a snowflake not?
I think that DNA's instructions, right? Instructions for like building something. That's literally what like the genetic ordering communicates the message of like what a being is going to look like, what they're going to. That's right. Am I wrong in saying that, or would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That DNA communicates that message. So like for example, the snowflakes have DNA. The snowflakes have DNA. They're not living organisms, right? So they don't have DNA.
No, they don't have DNA.
Okay.
But they have factors that will determine how they end up looking, like temperature, or the size of the grain that is at the center, or something like that.
Okay, so what message would you say that a snowflake communicates? Or would you say that it communicates one at all?
I don't think it communicates a message. I'm sure you could find messages in snowflakes if you look for them, if you tried to interpret the structure and tried to correlate it with things you see in your everyday world. You might be able to find some message, but I don't think it would like place their intention.
I guess it could. I guess it could communicate a message.
It's a very deep philosophical question to say, how do you denote what is the message? Like if we were trying to communicate with aliens and we send them a piece of paper with drawing on it, they might not think of that as a message at all. They might think
a piece. Okay.
Like we see writing as a way to communicate, and we're like, obviously this like sequence of characters encodes some meaning that I'm trying to convey to you.
Yes.
But there's no guarantee that that's how aliens communicate.
Yeah, they could communicate a different type of way. Like, but if we observe like any like synchronized pattern of like sound, like even if we couldn't interpret what that was, like would we take that as being the product of natural forces, or would we take that as sign of alien life? What do you think? Like if let's say we heard like even like with going back to something like Morse code, because somebody hears knocking, right, and they don't think anything about it. But then when you hear the synchronized pattern, because it's not just like random, like there's not just random knocks, like there's a sequence and an order and a repetition to it, right? Like if let's say like in outer space we were to hear like X, we got the Morse code, we wouldn't assume that natural forces were producing that.
Yeah, I mean maybe like for weather, I don't know, like. You think of, say, storms as, characters, and you look at, when there's a storm, it's not a storm. Like, we see that as, just natural events, but maybe there's some code there that somebody's intentionally trying to communicate, and we just wouldn't know at all.
Who would that someone be?
Well, could be God, could be aliens, I don't know. But my point is that we don't necessarily know that a message is a message just by looking at it.
Okay. Okay.
But
I feel that.
But
I hear that. Yeah, sure. Where does that leave us? Yeah, I guess that was one example of like like one thing that I was thinking about was like a message, something that communicates like communicates specific information. I just have a hard time, like, I think that typically we don't take that to be the product of natural forces. Like, even a simple message like, again, like, XYZ loves XYZ on the beach, we would never assume that the sand just like washed up. I mean, is it possible that could have happened? Sure, but like 99% of the time people are going to assume that came from like a person. You know what I'm saying? Like, people communicate messages.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, those are messages are evidence of intelligence. Like, I think 99% of the time. But I understand with your question when you're saying that, like, what constitutes like a message, and I guess I'm having a hard time trying to convey it in a way that like really maybe addresses it. But.
Yeah, I know, but I think what you're saying makes sense. Messages
usually
when we detect a message
are normally the product not of natural forces but intelligent ones.
Like, they might be, but it's pretty
They
unlikely.
could be, but here's the thing, right? Where you said like, even when like going back to like weather patterns, right? If weather patterns were trying to communicate a message, they would be being communicated by some intelligent source.
Yeah.
You said aliens again, so aliens or God.
Sure.
But either way, that's intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So then, do we agree?
We agree that there has to be a higher
Intelligent source, like. Because, like, for example, you said that weather patterns could be, right?
Yeah.
But you said it could be God, could be aliens, both of which are intelligently communicating a message, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying there could be a message there. The question is there a message that's being communicated? Is what our friend.
If there is, do you think it's a sign of intelligence? Is it the product of intelligence or is it natural forces?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a higher intelligence, but I think if I saw like a message in the universe, I'd be.
Would you assume that it came from natural forces, or would you assume that it came from intelligence?
Yeah, it would be intelligence.
Intelligence.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Damn,
I think so too.
I guess I haven't seen some message encoded in the. Yeah, the one thing I have
for
seen
sure.
is, like, for example, the fact that the conditions for life are perfect. Say on other, other planets or whatever, it's like impossible.
And what do you think about that?
So there is something that gives me an explanation that's not necessarily intelligence.
Wait, when it comes to like the fact that we have life on Earth?
Yeah, or like the fact that the conditions around us are so perfect for life.
So the conditions are. So how much would you say that you believe in chance? Like, would you think you're a lucky guy?
No.
Okay, you don't think you're a lucky guy? Do you think you can guess the number in my head right now? Okay, I'm gonna think of a number. Hold on. The number is 5. Okay, go. Did you hear what I just said? No. Okay, man, guess the number.
23.
That was 5.
5? Okay.
It was 5, but
yeah, not lucky.
Oh, no, that's cool, it's cool. But I saw some. So like, when it comes to like the fact that like life seems to be like almost fine-tuned to. I mean, the conditions for the world seem almost to be fine-tuned to support human life. So like, when we say chance, like, I feel like apparently like the chances of like the world being the way that it is kind of like 1 in like, you would probably get struck by lightning 1,000 times before that happens. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. Are you a betting man? Like, are you willing to take those chances, or or do you think that it's more probable that like there is a higher power that has fine-tuned, you know what I'm saying, life?
Yeah, I think if at face value that comparison, it's much more likely that it would be intentionally fine-tuned, because we do see it fine-tuned.
Yeah, we do.
But I think that in reality, we're making this observation from a position where life arose. If you made 100 billion trillion planets, and 1 in 100 billion trillion of those were conditioned just right for life, based on random chance, those people would think that they're unexplainably lucky. It can't be random chance. But that's just because the only people who are making that comparison are those where it was lucky enough. And there's 100 trillion planets where life didn't arise. So we think we're so lucky because the only people who can consider chance at all are those who are lucky.
Interesting. What was I gonna say? I was gonna say, dang, I low-key forgot what I was gonna say.
No worries.
You were saying, because he was talking about like 100 billion, quadrillion different planets and life and stuff like that. Dang, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh my God. I was gonna say, I just forgot what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Well, I think so far we made a lot of progress. My point about chance is that the luck can be explained because of just how probability works. Like we can be insanely lucky, but it's not necessarily weird to observe.
Yes, sir. My man is back. That's fine. Bro, get into this, man. Let's talk about it some more.
You ever taken a math class?
Yep, ABC.
This man is using a complex term, bro. He's asking me about my childhood, but Daniel's asking me about my childhood.
And did you need to believe in God to believe that there was consistency over time?
Just because God explains this really well doesn't mean we should believe in God.
I need to get back to the East Coast as soon as possible. Help me.